My grandmother was born in a very small Texas town in the early 1940s, and this was also an extremely religious town that she lived in, and from a very early age, she was taught that God and Jesus could read her thoughts, knew every single thing that ever crossed her mind, was watching her at all times, and if she did not obey the rules set forth by the Bible, the church, and her family, she was going to be punished with an eternity burning in hell. Naturally, this created a scared girl who was terrified of bad things happening if she wasn't perfect. And so she dealt with anxiety and depression even from a young age. She was expected to perform perfectly, to think perfectly, to do perfectly, and by the time that she was 16 years old, she was married and had a kid, and it wasn't long after that that she had another kid. At this point, her husband, who was in the military, was overseas, and so it was just her at home with 2 babies, a bunch of housework, no money, and her depression came back with a vengeance. Eventually, she ended up going to a psychologist and telling him what was going on with her, and what he said to her changed her entire life. He told her, "You think you need to be a good wife, you think you need to be a good mother, you think you need to be a good daughter, you think you need to be a good Southerner, and you think you need to be a good Christian." And it was in that moment that she realized that she thinks she had to be all of those things, but she didn't have to be all of that. She had been living in this construction of reality that she thought she had to live in. And that is when her identification with the thoughts that were coming up in her head diminished, and she was able to loosen up and get better. Her anxiety and depression lessened, and she was able to still do the things that she needed to do, but without this immense pressure that had been weighing on her for all of the years before that. And it's interesting because I had a similar experience, but I was in my early 20s, and it was also following a deep depression because of a breakup that I had gone through, but the identification with the thoughts broke during this awakening experience that I had, and it completely changed my entire perspective on life. What both of us were able to learn in these extremely different situations is that you are not your thoughts. You are experiencing thoughts and you're hearing them, but they are not essentially you. And when you take them so seriously, it's very easy to get lost in this constructed mental world. And the more intellectual you are, the more you intellectualize everything and conceptualize everything, the easier it is to get swept up into these thoughts and believe them to be fact. But I'm sure that you have had the experience before where you knew something to be true. You felt it in your gut, you felt it in your heart, and then you continued to think your way out of that. And what I want to say today is that not all knowledge comes from your head. And as someone who has intellectualized literally every single minute of most of my life, I can tell you with certainty that the information coming from your head is not most of the time the information that you should be listening to. The more emphasis I put on my mind, the worse my decisions get and the worse my experience gets. And that's why for a while now I've been actively trying to live more from my heart and more from my gut. And it is scary, and the mind does not know how to deal with it a lot of the times. And so it will bring up all of these thoughts of fear and what if and but what about this? And it can get pretty fucking loud. But the more you listen to that gut and that heart in you, the more easy it will be to realize that those thoughts, while they have protected you up until now, because that's their whole job, they're not going to get you to where you want to be, and they're not going to allow you to feel how you want to feel, assuming that you want to feel good. And so, something I've been trying to do recently is go from my head more into my body, and it allows me to dip out of the fear and into what I know to be true. For example, I know I want to create videos, I know I want to write, I know I want to make art, but for the longest time, my brain, my thoughts were like, no, that's not possible. You have to do XYZ, all these things to make money, to whatever it was at the time. But the point I'm trying to make is that living from your mind only for your entire life is like living in a shallow pond. Like, you have not allowed yourself to step into a deeper experience of yourself and of the world. And so today I wanted to share some things that I've been doing to recenter myself when I find that I am stuck in my mind again. The very first thing is to remind yourself that these are just thoughts. That is the first step to name the fact that you are thinking a lot and maybe in a fearful thought loop, and then you can move on to the next step, which is to bring yourself down into your body. I do this in different ways, but it basically can be summed up in breathing or movement. So I have been playing basketball a lot recently. Also working out has been super helpful to get more in your body. It's very hard to be in your head when you're lifting heavy objects. But if you can't do that, if you're about to go into a sales call, if you're about to, do something on stage, if you're just unable to go take 20, 30 minutes to move your body and go on a walk even, then I like to breathe at least 5 times. And I don't know, I'm sure there's some sort of name for it, but you just want to make sure that you're breathing out twice as long as you're breathing in. So I'll sit there and I'll just breathe through my nose. Like, I'll literally try to make that breath go out for as long as I can. And doing that at least 5 times, resets you in a way that you can, feel your body. You might even get a little bit lightheaded and forget what you were thinking about, but that's part of the point, is to just get out of your head and back in your body so that you can have a more centered approach to what's going on. I know this is super simple, and for that reason, I have avoided doing it for the longest time, but I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm realizing you can't ignore these basic things. Unfortunately, no one teaches us this in school. I think this should be, required learning, but it isn't. And so we have to we have to learn these things ourselves. And it may seem stupid simple to go on a walk or to go play basketball or pickleball or lift some weights or whatever you want to do, but that and breathing is very, very helpful for when you get stuck in those anxious states and like fearful states. And so that's all I wanted to share today. And I am sending you all the good vibes. You got this. We got this. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.